airport has been hosting planes from at least 7 NATO nations. In the island's main harbour, a South Korean destroyer which has been evacuating workers from Libya. Military vessels from a number of NATO countries are just off the coast. With AWACS spy aircraft overhead and a fleet of Western naval vessels offshore, there is concern here in Malta, an EU nation, but one that prizes itself on its neutrality. A former Prime Minister of Malta told me he doesn't believe Western powers when they say they're only here to evacuate their nationals.
They cannot be trusted because if I were in their place, I would exploit the opportunity I have of the strategic position to spy and to do all that is necessary in preparation of any military attack. So it's not a question of evacuation only. They are exploiting also the circumstances for their own ends.
It's adding to concern here that this island's neutrality is slowly being eroded. James Bayes, Al Jazeera, Malta.
Well, let's discuss more on this with Awad El Fatiri, who's from the Libyan Information Centre here in Doha and joins me in the studio. Good to have you with us. I mean, while all these discussions are going on about what action the international community should or shouldn't take, the fighting is continuing on the ground. A lot of conflicting reports coming out of Libya now on who is in charge of what and just how much impetus the rebel forces have.
With the closure of the internet and in some cities like AlJazeera, even the electricity power being cut off, it is very difficult to have news. It's very rare to tell who's in control. But nevertheless, taking into account the scale of powers, it's not equal, as you said. I think the revolutionaries are doing very well. The fighting in Zawiya is going on as I'm talking to you now. Yesterday, the casualties in Gaddafi's side, there were 4 prisoners of war, 6 killed. They captured 4 tanks and 10 cars, which is by the point of view of the revolutionary is good.
Nevertheless, there are growing casualties and there's a huge humanitarian crisis, a lot of people being displaced. Do you think that the international community may be forced into taking some kind of action because of the humanitarian situation?
I think they have to, especially with the news just now. They're saying the rate of the people who's leaving Libya dropped from 12,000 a day to 2,000. The international community, knowing Gaddafi, they have to take this very seriously.
Because they think those people are being stopped from leaving?
I am sure they are, because Gaddafi is notorious of doing so. He has used the Bangladeshi before, and I have mentioned this before. He collected the black-skinned people in Tripoli. He used them against their will, and I'm sure he's doing this now again. So the international community, they have to interfere and do something about this.
What do you say to those who say, well, okay, if a no-fly zone is imposed, then that puts an onus on the international community to take more action, to go further if that doesn't work. And so they get dragged in whether they want to or not?
We hope not to come to that point, but if they start doing things, that will show Gaddafi that the international community taking the matter seriously. They're not just talking and behind the closed doors. They have to take any sort of action to show Gaddafi that the international community is willing to interfere if necessary.
Okay, Awad, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. Awad El Fatiri there. Now, over in Saudi Arabia, activists say security forces have detained at least 22 protesters. That's according to Reuters news agency. They were reportedly detained after a protest in the eastern town of Qatif on Friday. This amateur video, purportedly of the demonstration, was posted on a social media website. Shia Muslims have been calling for more rights in the majority Sunni country. On Saturday, the Interior Minister banned all demonstrations. Now, Shia Muslims have been pushing for more rights in neighbouring Bahrain in protests directed at the Sunni royal family. But in their latest demonstration, around 200 Shia protesters have been rallying outside the US embassy, calling for intervention. Protesters have been camped out at Manama's Pearl roundabout since last month, but their stand has won only minor concessions. Well, we have a correspondent on the ground in Bahrain. We're going to speak to him now, but we're not going to name him for his own safety. Tell us, first of all, it was a peaceful demonstration outside the US Embassy, wasn't it? What do protesters actually want?
You're right, Julie, it was peaceful, as all of the protests over the last few days have been, but there was a lot of emotions. Emotions are running high, but interestingly, one of the protesters told me that whereas in the past you might have expected the chant to be against America, this time the protesters were keen to stress that they were not at all anti-American. In fact, they were very happy with what the USA had done in terms of lending support in their eyes to revolutions in countries like Egypt, in Tunisia, and even now in Libya. And what they're saying is that they don't want US intervention in Bahrain, quite the opposite. They want the US government to stop backing the calls by the Bahraini government for dialogue, because they say that the majority of the population here in Bahrain don't want political dialogue. They simply want the government to go.
And what is the government saying about the demonstrations?
Well, it's very difficult. It's a difficult balancing act for the government here in Bahrain. They have re-emphasised, if you like, the right of people to hold peaceful protests. In fact, on Sunday night, Crown Prince Salman, who's been asked by his father, King Hamad, to oversee this dialogue process, he gave a TV interview in which he specifically said people have the right to stage sit-ins, which was a veiled reference to the Pearl roundabout, where hundreds of people have been camped out for weeks now. But at the same time, he did say that he hopes the Chamber of Commerce in Bahrain will present their take on what's happened over the last few weeks. Many people are expecting the trade bodies here in Bahrain to come out with some very strong figures on how the economy has suffered. We know that the Formula One Grand Prix meeting on March the 13th was cancelled, and some businesses are saying that they're being hard hit, so probably they'll be stepping up their calls for an end to the protests, Julie.
OK, our correspondent in Bahrain there. Thanks very much indeed for that. Now, Egypt's new Prime Minister is due to address the nation on Monday. SM Sharaf is also expected to swear in a caretaker cabinet. On Sunday, hundreds of protesters gathered in front of the state security headquarters in Cairo, demanding entry to gather documents. Egyptians have been trying to gain access to information gathered by ousted President Hosni Mubarak's regime. Still to come this half hour, on patrol with international forces in Afghanistan. We look at how successful the extra American troops have been. And the shuttle Discovery undocks for its last journey after nearly 30 years of space travel.